There's a problem that arises when writing any story that isn't set in modern day real life. How do the people of this time and place think and speak? Make it too different from our own and it becomes too incomprehensible. Make it too modern and it seems anachronistic. A lot of genres have to overcome this. Sci-fi, for example, often introduces new technical terms, futuristic slang, and alien languages. Sometimes it works and comes off as natural, other times it feels artificial. Historical fiction has to walk the tightrope between characters in ancient Rome, Tudor England, and the Pirate Age being understandable and breaking the immersion with an ill-timed word or phrase. Medieval fantasy has a similar problem, made even more difficult by the fact that its stories exist in worlds completely separate to our own. Readers will generally overlook the fact that every word in a given language has roots and origins in our world, sometimes smoothed over if the author presents the text as a translation from some other fantastical language. More problematic are idioms and phrases, because these can stand out more as jarring if they come from our world. One solution is to make up your own. A Song of Ice and Fire has plenty. Words are wind, sweet summer child, half a hundred, much and more, nipples on a breastplate, it is known. Whether they feel natural or not is partly down to reader preference. All the ones I mentioned I think are either good or at least okay. But an example of one that jars for me is in Fire and Blood, when Gildane observes that a maester's chain is only as strong as its weakest link. To me, this feels like someone in our world trying to make an A Song of Ice and Fire version of this phrase. Perhaps because our version would make just as much sense in Westeros. But again, it might scan fine to you, this is all subjective. Where a story can trip up with more world-breaking implications, however, is in using real-world idioms that have specific origins the reader might know. And here, the final boss of the English language, with fingers in every lexicological pie, is Shakespeare. Shakespeare is credited with inventing thousands of words that we use today, and those generally go under the radar in otherworldly fantasy. No one is hurling down a Game of Thrones in disgust because the use of the words obscene, fashionable, and swagger is universe-breaking. Phrases, however, might get noticed, as happened to me when recently rereading Theon's last chapter in Clash, when Ramsay rescues the Ironborn and asks for his reward, and Theon thinks, "Pay him his pound of flesh." This is of course a phrase that derives from a Shakespeare play, The Merchant of Venice, when the moneylender Shylock demands a pound of flesh from Antonio as a repayment for a loan. This kind of trips you up because it isn't a single word or a phrase that you can imagine would enter the language naturally. It's hard to think of this arising independently of the play. There's loads of phrases that come from Shakespeare, but it's only the famous ones or the ones that obviously link to key moments in those stories that could take the reader out of it. Like Tyrion thinking of Ilan Payne at Joffrey's wedding as the spectre at the feast, which immediately makes you think of Macbeth. Bear in mind, by the way, that I've never read any of these plays or seen them in any form because I'm an uncultured swine, but they are well known enough that by cultural osmosis they still get into your head. Not all of them do, of course. One that's kind of borderline is this bit said by Haldon Halfmaester to Tyrion. Does it raise any red flags to you? The phrase in question is Band of Brothers, which is part of the most famous speech in Henry V, most famous in that it's the only one I recognise. I didn't twig it until looking for this video, but it's sort of in the same category as phrases that someone might conceivably trip up on. So is William Shakespeare canonical to A Song of Ice and Fire? And if so, do all of his plays exist in this universe? If Macbeth, Merchants of Venice, and Henry V exist, then do Scotland, anti-Semitism, and the French? Fear not, we needn't go that far. Perhaps there's an element of the Discworld approach at play, where direct parody versions of historical figures and their deeds exist in a fantastical setting. Discworld has Leonardo of Quirm for Leonardo da Vinci, Didactylos for Diogenes the Cynic, and Bloody Stupid Johnson for Capability Brown. There's even a version of Shakespeare, Hwel, who is regularly struck by the sleet of inspiration from across the multiverse, which leads to plays such as Things Which Happened on a Midsummer's Night, and After All, Not Much Happened Really. This means you can have some fun thinking about what the Shakespeare plays would look like in Westeros. Macbeth, for example, would probably be about a power struggle between kings beyond the wall, with Mance Beth being undone by some magical weirwoods rather than Andy Burnham in a tree costume. Merchant of Venice would no doubt be set in Bravos, where the Iron Bank wants your flesh for some kind of nefarious faceless men's sorcery. And Henry V? Well, thankfully, though Venice and Scotland have A Song of Ice and Fire parallels of Bravos and Beyond the Wall, there isn't much of one for France. Maybe Dorne, the bitter enemy to the south you keep trying to conquer with disastrous results, though Dorne is arguably a better parallel for Spain, or Wales, or even Vietnam than it is for France. Still, you could imagine Daron I giving an impassioned speech before a victorious battle against the Dornish. Daron also wrote about his victories in a book where he exaggerated the numbers of Dornish soldiers, very similar to how the French outnumbered the English at Agincourt, but probably not as much as was propagandized at the time, especially relevant for the Band of Brothers line, seeing as that speech is all about how Henry V is glad that there's so few Englishmen, so there's more glory to go around. We happy few and all that. But who would be the Shakespeare of Westeros writing all of these plays? Well, I know I put Baelor Breakspear on the thumbnail in an act of shameless clickbait, but aside from having a rhyming surname, he doesn't quite fit the bill. See what I did there? There are playwrights in the story, such as Fario Farrell and Quill, but there's also a historical figure with a suspicious name. One of the houses in the Westerlands is House Stackspear. You probably don't remember Alan Stackspear, but he's mentioned a couple times over the series in the various Lannister armies. Way back in Aegon III's reign, a Lord Stackspear briefly became one of his regents. This lord's name? Willem. Oh, and famously, William Shakespeare's name has more spellings than You've Had Hot Dinners, most of the contemporary signature ones missing out the first E, so looking something like Shakespeare. Due to the nature of Fire and Blood, we know almost nothing about Willem Stackspear, besides that he loved hawking. Shakespeare did write about hawks a fair bit, but then he wrote about everything a fair bit, so if this is a reference, it would probably have to be specified a bit more in Fire and Blood Part 2, coming to an irradiated bookshop near you in 2097. Either way, it's a fun Easter egg, a bit like the Muppet Tullys or House Jourdain. So what was the point of all this? Should we denounce the A Song of Ice and Fire series at the next local book burning for the crime of literary anachronism? Nah, not really. I just thought it was a fun thing to point out. Until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.